All right, so next up is community ecology. So what a community is essentially is so remember we talked about a population ecology before, and that's looking at individuals of the same species interacting and those interactions that they have, their birth rates, their death rates, things like that. Okay, so that's like looking at how populations change over time and how they interact with themselves within that population. A community, remember, is all of the species that live together in a similar area. So you, a dog, a cat, the grass, insects, bacteria, everything that lives within that same area. Okay, so that's what community ecology tends to focus on. Specifically, the interactions between those different species. Those interactions between species are called interspecific interactions. Intraspecific is between the same species. Interspecific, just like international, means between different countries. So we're going to focus on those interactions. So the first interaction that's important to discuss is competition. And competition, you notice at the top it has a negative slash a negative. Competition is always bad for both parties. It doesn't improve the other one's condition by the other species being there if they're in competition for similar resources or habitat in that case. So usually this happens when you have an overlap in niches. And remember, the definition of a niche is the role that a species has within a community, what they eat, where they live, who they interact with, and all of the biotic interactions and also abiotic resources that they use. Okay, so that's a niche. If there's two different species that eat the exact same thing, that's going to result in competition, right? Or if they try to live in similar areas, that's going to result in competition. And that negatively affects both, okay? So there's this idea called the competitive exclusion principle, which is this idea that two species that are competing for the same limiting resources cannot coexist within the same niche, really, okay? In the same place if they are in the same niche. There's a difference between a realized niche and a fundamental niche, and you can kind of see that here with these two different species of barnacles. You can see that grayer colored, so let's just call them the gray colored one and the brown colored one to make it easier. So the gray colored one, its fundamental niche, it could live all the way up from low tide to high tide. It could live there if it wanted to. Or I should say the brown one, excuse me. The brown one can live anywhere from low tide to high tide, but the gray species can only live down lower than that. So because to limit competition, they're both going to be competing with each other, right, in that lower, between low tide and where the two arrows kind of overlap right here. You would expect the brown one, right, to try to limit competition. So it's only going to live up here because it can. And so it doesn't have to compete with the other one. It's only going to live here, and then the other one can live here kind of peacefully. We limit niche overlap. We both allow them to coexist. That's the idea of the competitive exclusion principle. One or the other is going to beat the other one out. They either have to kind of adapt, or one of them is going to go extinct in that case. Okay, so resource partitioning is actually this idea that if they do have similar niches, they can partition those resources and use them in slightly different ways in order to coexist within a community. You can see that with these warblers. They live in different parts of the tree, depending on the different species of warbler, to limit their competition and their niche overlap. Same thing, you can see these different species of anoles, which are a type of lizard, living in different parts of the tree, in order to limit that niche overlap. So that's the idea behind resource partitioning. Okay, the next relationship is predation. Predation is when one thing benefits and the other one is negatively affected. Now you can imagine that this is a predator-prey relationship. Okay, the predator is the one who's doing the killing. They're going to get the benefit from that. The prey is obviously going to be negatively affected by that because they will be killed. And really the focus on predation, aside from the fact that you want to understand that one is positively affected, the predator, and one is negatively affected, the prey, that there's adaptations for predators and adaptations for prey that they will have, that evolution is kind of pruned over time. And it's kind of like this, as one gains a benefit, the other one's going to have to adapt as a species, remember, randomly, it's not purposeful, in order to kind of counteract that adaptation that the other one has. Or else the other one's going to probably, again, go extinct or have to change whatever its food source is, or, as I said, it would go extinct if it's a prey item. So some of the adaptations for predators are things like claws, teeth, fangs, stingers, poison. So if things have those, if there's animals that have those things, it's likely, and when I say teeth, I mean sharp, like ripping teeth, those are going to most likely be predators. Okay, so think about anything you think of as being a predator, they have one of those characteristics. So on the other hand, what are the prey adaptations? Prey adaptations are things like camouflage, the ability to run quickly and flee, to be very fast on your feet, to have alarm calls, to have other self-defense mechanisms, like even having poison glands within themselves, like a lot of frogs and toads have. You can see these howler monkeys. They're going to actually spend time. If you watch my animal behavior video, howler monkeys, one of the individuals, a bunch of them will stand up and watch guard, and they will make this super loud booming sound whenever there's a predator that comes nearby. Okay. So bitterness and impalatability, it doesn't taste good too, on top of poison. Having quills, like a porcupine. Porcupines aren't predators, though they will eat animals, but they're more of their adaptations are for not being eaten. There's also this thing called aposematic coloration, and this is an interesting prey adaptation. It's that if you see anything that is seemingly, it's not really a predator, right? But it's kind of walking around and it's brightly colored. It's a warning. Oh, excuse me. It's a warning that if you try to eat that, it's probably going to die. It's probably poisonous, because if a species is that defenseless, and if that bright in color, it's like, oh look, it's so blatantly obvious out here. Any predator can see it, so it should be eaten, and that should not be a trait that is selected for. So if they have it, that means they probably have bright colors, and that allows predators to realize that they shouldn't eat something like that because it likely is poisonous. Camouflage, super cool, and that can be both predator and prey have camouflage. You can see all these different examples of it. This is actually, so you can see right here we have our jaguar sitting in the brush there. You can see clearly this is, for like a rabbit that lives in a snowy environment, so it more easily blends in, so it can't be seen. The owl here in the tree, very similar coloration to the tree. And then there's two insane ones, right? You can see this leaf insect right here. Like, nothing's going to find that. You would just walk over it as if it was a leaf. Same thing with this gecko. Looks just like the leaves in the trees in which it lives. It's amazing some of the things that have evolved over the course of time to allow for mostly prey, but predators as well, to be able to camouflage and blend into their environment. Okay, mimicry is this idea that one organism is similar, usually it's an animal, to resemble something else. Okay, a similarity of one organism, usually an animal, to another that has evolved because of the resemblance is favorable to that animal. This is not camouflage, because it's not, the purpose of this is not to hide or blend in. This is to actually look like something else on purpose. So as I said here, there is a difference. This is different than camouflage because it's not about them hiding, but some types of camouflage can be considered mimicry. Sometimes it has to do with the way it physically looks. Sometimes it has to do with the smell that it produces. It produces a similar smell to another type of animal that gives it a benefit. So there's two types of mimicry that you really should know. There's Batesian and Müllerian mimicry. In Batesian mimicry, it's this idea that a palatable, or a species that is not really that dangerous or is pretty harmless, will mimic something that is either really bad tasting or is dangerous. So you can see this clear-winged moth, okay? Nothing's messing with that clear-winged moth because they think it looks a lot like a wasp. And if you looked and saw that, you'd probably stay away from it because it looks like a wasp due to that yellow and black coloration. That black and yellow coloration that wasps and bees have is kind of a widely known thing in the animal kingdom to kind of stay away from that coloration. But this clear-winged moth is actually hacking that. It's not dangerous, but it looks like it, so things would leave it alone. So that's Batesian mimicry, when a harmless species mimics a harmful one. There's also Müllerian mimicry, and that's similar to that red and black coloration. That dangerous things tend to evolve similar types of characteristics. Okay, so like two different bees, the bees and wasps, black and yellow. You think, okay, I need to stay away from that type of thing. This is showing you the similar idea to Batesian mimicry here with the viceroy butterfly and the monarch. The monarch is very disgusting tasting, but you really can't tell the difference unless you really pay attention to the viceroy. You can't tell the difference between the viceroy and the monarch, even though the monarch's poisonous due to its diet, actually. And the viceroy is something that would be palatable to basically anything can be edible. Here's showing you more Batesian examples. We can see the coral snake here and the king snake. The coral snake is very poisonous, and the king snake is not poisonous. Now notice there is a difference in their color pattern, but to the casual observer or an animal, they really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So they're going to probably stay away from the king snake, even though it's fairly harmless. You can see here this is a moth right here with these are like warning spots on its back that look like eye spots. So what'll happen is it'll sit on either a leaf or on a twig, and a bird will come at it, and right before the bird gets there, it'll open its wings, and the bird gets freaked out because he thinks it's some sort of predator or something. And you see these eye spots a lot on insects, specifically butterflies and moths. Here you can see this is kind of cool. This is a caterpillar right here. This is actually the rear end of the caterpillar. It looks almost identical to the face of a vine snake, which is poisonous. So this caterpillar kind of sits on, doing its thing, eating its leaves, and then if something tries to come at it, it'll just move its back end up at something, and they're scared of it because they think it's a dangerous vine snake. So here's the Müllerian examples that I was talking about before. All of these species of butterfly down here are all impatible, or they're not palatable. I shouldn't say are not palatable. That's the word I wanted to say. But in these showing you yellow jackets and wasps and bees all kind of look very similar because that is the mechanism that has evolved to show that they're dangerous. Specifically in Hymenoptera too, which is the species of bees and wasps. Okay, herbivory, that's again when a plant is eaten by an animal. Okay, herbivores do this. Again, the plant is negatively affected because it's being eaten. Remember, the term for an animal that eats plants are called herbivores, and the plant is another name for that is a primary autotroph, and another term for a herbivore is a primary consumer because they're the first consumer in the food chain. So the base of every food chain or food pyramid are plants, the primary producers. The first thing that does eat the plants is called the primary consumer. We'll talk about that more later though.